He thought it was beachworthless land. Michael Harris, a 60-year-old realtor from the Colorado mountains, inherited a rundown Victorian lodge beside a dried-up lake, a property everyone called the dead ground. But when his loyal German shepherd, Ranger, uncovered a sealed stone chamber beneath the ruins, Michael stumbled upon something far greater than gold, a hidden waterway, a forgotten legacy, and the truth his family buried decades ago. What began as a broken inheritance became a story of faith, love, and redemption. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and may God bless everyone watching. The morning wind swept through Dry Creek Valley, carrying the sharp scent of pine and the brittle chill of early winter. Thin mist crawled over the mountains like breath from an old ghost, and frost clung to the wooden railing of Michael Harris's porch. The world was silent, except for the soft click of Ranger's claws on the steps. Michael stood with a letter in his hand, yellowed paper, wax seal cracked with age, stamped with a faint E.M. It was the first time in decades he'd seen those initials. Eleanor Moore, his aunt, dead 10 years now. He stared at it for a long moment before breaking the seal. His fingers trembled slightly, not from cold, but from the weight of memory. Eleanor had raised him for a few years after his mother's death. She'd been a peculiar woman, tall, graceful even in her 60s, with silver-streaked hair always pulled into a knot and eyes that seemed to see through time. She'd taught him that every piece of land has a heartbeat, though back then he'd thought it nonsense. Now, at 60, Michael Harris no longer believed in much of anything. Once a top-tier real estate broker in Denver, he'd sold luxury homes to people who mistook marble for meaning. But when his wife left him for one of those clients, and his son moved to Chicago to start over somewhere that felt alive, he had quietly retired to the mountains. There, silence became his only dependable companion. Well, silence and Ranger. Ranger, a 6-year-old German shepherd with intelligent amber eyes and a torn right ear, was sprawled at his feet, watching the letter with the solemnity of a priest. His coat shimmered black and gold beneath the thin morning light, his body lean and ready. The dog had been a rescue, trained once as a canine, and carried that old discipline like a ghost of another life. Michael sighed. "Guess the dead are better at finding me than the living, huh, boy?" Ranger tilted his head, as if half agreeing. The letter's paper felt soft as cloth beneath his fingertips. Inside was a single page written in Eleanor's old-fashioned cursive, elegant but urgent. "To my nephew, Michael Harris. If this finds you, then what I began is unfinished. You inherit the Moore Lodge and everything within its walls. Do not sell it. Look for what I could not take with me. The answer sleeps where water used to sing. Eleanor Moore." Attached to the letter was a deed. 200 acres of land along Dry Creek, including a derelict Victorian lodge and the dry lake bed that once made the area famous for trout fishing. County records called it non-productive land. In realtor terms, that meant worthless. Michael frowned. "You left me a ghost town, Aunt Ellie." Ranger gave a soft growl, sniffing the paper. As the dog pawed at the envelope, something metallic clinked inside. Michael turned it over, and out fell a small bronze key, heavy for its size, engraved with a set of numbers, 12.0842. "What are you hiding?" he muttered. Tucked beneath the deed was another note, faint and almost poetic. "Water flows beneath stone, a heart beats under ash." Michael's realtor brain tried to file it under eccentric nonsense, but another part of him, the part that still missed his aunt's strange riddles, felt a tug of curiosity. Dry Creek had been dry for nearly 30 years, so where could water possibly still flow? He poured coffee into a tin cup and stared toward the mountains. The sun hadn't yet burned through the mist, and the lodge's name echoed in his mind like an unfinished conversation. Moore Lodge. He hadn't been there since he was a child. That afternoon, he drove into town. The tires hummed against the frozen road, pine trees arching overhead like old sentinels. He parked outside Brooks and Willow Books, a crooked little shop that smelled of cedar and ink. Behind the counter stood Maggie Brooks, the owner, a woman in her late 50s, with streaks of silver in her chestnut hair, laughter lines around her eyes, and the kind of gentle curiosity that made people talk too much around her. "Michael Harris," she said, recognizing him. "The man who sold half the valley before deciding to live in the other half." He smiled faintly. "I need to ask you about a place nobody wants." Well, you've come to the right person, she replied, handing him tea instead of coffee. We specialize in unwanted things. He explained about the letter, the deed, the key. Maggie listened, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Eleanor Moore, she was a fascinating woman, Maggie said, leaning on the counter. Did you know she once petitioned the state to reopen the Dry Creek aquifer? Claimed the water hadn't vanished, just been stolen. Stolen? Diverted, technically. There's an old rumor that a developer upstream redirected the flow back in the 70s. The records vanished when his company folded. You might check the old hydrology maps. 1940s edition. She winked. Water's like love, Michael. The surface may dry up, but the underground current, that's what can drown you. He chuckled softly. You sound like her. That's a compliment, she said. And for a moment, there was a spark between them. Quiet, but unmistakable. When he left, the wind had shifted, carrying the scent of snow. Ranger trotted beside him, alert as always. The lodge waited 10 miles north, crouched by the dry lake like an abandoned relic. By dusk, he reached it. The Moore Lodge rose from the weeds, a 3-story Victorian ghost, paint peeled to bone, windows shattered, its once grand porch sagging under years of neglect. The fading light made its silhouette look almost alive. Inside, dust floated like ash in the glow of his lantern. The walls bore faded murals of lilies and rivers. Floorboards sighed beneath his boots, as if exhaling after decades of silence. Ranger sniffed along the baseboards, his nose twitching. Not much left of your legacy, Aunt Ellie, Michael whispered. Then Ranger froze. His ears pricked toward the far wall near the fireplace. He gave a short bark, then began pawing at a section of loose brickwork. Michael knelt, curiosity flaring. Together they pulled away the cracked bricks, revealing a hollow cavity inside the wall. From it, he drew a small leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth and the initials E.M. embossed in gold. Michael brushed away the dust. You really didn't want to be forgotten, did you? He flipped open the first page. The ink had faded, but her handwriting was still clear. They think the lake died of drought. It didn't. Someone drained its veins to starve the land. I must keep the proof hidden until the right eyes find it. His heartbeat quickened. Each line felt heavier than the last. If you're reading this, my dear boy, then you are the right eyes. Beneath the roots of the willow that faces the moon, the truth sleeps. When the stone answers, you'll know. Beneath the text, a simple engraving. E.M. plus L.S. He frowned. Who the hell is L.S.? The wind outside howled suddenly, rattling the shutters. Ranger let out a low growl, his hackles lifting, as if something, or someone, had brushed past the window. Michael turned toward the dark glass, pulse tightening. Nothing but the reflection of his lantern flame. And yet, for a moment, he could have sworn he saw another light moving through the trees, faint and deliberate, as if someone else already knew he was there. The next morning came pale and windless, the kind of stillness that felt like the world was holding its breath. The frost that had gathered on the windows of Moore Lodge glittered faintly as the sun climbed over the ridge. Michael Harris sat at the kitchen table, the old leather journal lying open beside a mug of untouched coffee. Ranger lay at his feet, chin resting on his paws, eyes half closed but ears alert, a soldier pretending to sleep. The journal's last words kept circling in Michael's mind. When the stone answers, you'll know. He didn't know what it meant, but something in that phrase pulsed like a heartbeat beneath the quiet. He packed the book, the bronze key, and the letter into his satchel, locked up the house, and drove toward town. The mist had lifted, revealing the valley in full. Bare trees, brittle grasses, the ghostly expanse of the old lake bed stretching like a scar across the land. At Brooks and Willow Books, the little bell chimed as he entered. Maggie Brooks looked up from behind the counter, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. She was dressed in a soft olive cardigan and a long gray skirt, her hair loosely tied back. There was a gentleness about her that morning, the sort of calm born from knowing both love and loss, and learning how to keep living after both. Back already? She teased. Either the lodge has ghosts, or you've got more questions. Maybe both, Michael said, smiling faintly. He laid the journal and key on the counter. I think my aunt hid something connected to the lake. She wrote about water beneath the stone. Do you still have those old geological maps you mentioned? Maggie's eyes brightened. Oh, I've got something better. Follow me. She led him to the back room, a warm, cluttered space filled with old records, rolled blueprints, and the faint scent of parchment. The yellow light of a single lamp turned everything to amber. She reached for a box labeled State Hydrology Archives, 1940s, pulling out a rolled map and a small tin case of microfilm reels. This, she said, laying the map across the table, is the original geological survey of Dry Creek Valley, 1942. Back then, the aquifer still ran straight under Moore Lodge. She adjusted her glasses and pointed at faint blue lines that spidered through the paper. See that? Those are underground water channels. But here, she tapped the map near the edge of the lake bed. There's a note. Private redirection approved. Permit filed by O. Price Construction. Michael's brow furrowed. O. Price? Maggie nodded. Owen Price. His family's been in construction and land development since before I was born. The current one, his grandson, still runs the company. They own half the land north of the ridge. The name stirred a vague memory. Owen Price, a developer he'd met years ago at a property conference in Denver. Smooth-talking, charismatic, all charm and polish on the outside. Beneath it, though, Michael had sensed something colder, like steel wrapped in silk. "Would you mind if I borrow this?" he asked, carefully rolling up the map. "You can keep it for now," she said, pouring tea into 2 chipped mugs, "but only if you promise to bring it back with a story." Michael smiled. "Deal." They sat together for a while, the lamp humming softly, the air thick with the smell of tea and old paper. Their conversation drifted from history to memory, and somewhere between laughter and silence, a quiet connection began to take root. Not romance yet, but the recognition of 2 lives that had both seen too much winter. Then Ranger, who had been dozing by the door, stood up abruptly. His ears pricked, body stiffening toward the window. He gave a low growl, the kind that wasn't for stray cats or shadows. "What is it, boy?" Ranger trotted to Michael, grabbed his coat sleeve with gentle insistence, and tugged. Maggie frowned. "Looks like he wants to show you something." Michael followed the dog out behind the shop, through the thinning mist toward the edge of the lake bed. Ranger led them down a slope to where a weeping willow grew stubbornly by the cracked earth, its branches long and silver green, whispering softly in the cold air. "This must be it," Michael murmured, "the willow that faces the moon." He knelt beside the roots. Ranger pawed at the ground, whining softly, then pressed his ear against the soil, tail flicking. Michael did the same, and to his disbelief, beneath the silence of frozen earth, there was a faint murmur, like water. He looked at Maggie. "Do you hear that?" She crouched, listening. "It's impossible. The lake's been dry since the 90s. Michael drew the bronze key from his coat and noticed a stone pillar half buried behind the tree, moss-grown and fractured. At its base was a small, rusted lockbox embedded in the stone itself, as if built into it. The key fit perfectly. With a slow turn, the lock clicked open, and the stone shifted slightly, exhaling a puff of cold air. Inside lay a sealed metal container wrapped in oilcloth. Michael opened it carefully. Inside were 2 documents, one brittle and yellowed, the other still crisp. The older one was a notarized water rights certificate dated 1943, signed by the county clerk and Eleanor Moore herself. The second was a blueprint showing a hidden subterranean channel running directly beneath Dry Creek, feeding into the foundations of Moore Lodge. Maggie exhaled. She was right. The lake wasn't dead. Someone killed it. Before Michael could respond, the sound of footsteps crunched through the dry grass behind them. A man's voice broke the stillness, low, confident, carrying that particular blend of warmth and threat that only power could produce. "Mr. Harris, I was hoping I'd find you here." Michael turned. Standing a few yards away was Owen Price, impeccably dressed in a charcoal coat, gloves of soft leather, and boots polished to a city shine. He looked to be in his mid-50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with salt-and-pepper hair combed neatly back. His face was handsome but severe, the kind of face that could sell trust while quietly calculating how to own it. "I heard you came into possession of Moore Lodge," Owen said, stepping closer. "Quite a piece of land. Tragic about the lake, though. Still, I'd like to make you an offer." Michael's guard went up instantly. "You came all this way to make an offer?" "I believe in face-to-face deals," Owen replied smoothly. "Let's say $50,000 for the entire property. Cash. You could walk away to tomorrow." "That's generous," Michael said slowly, "considering most think it's worthless." Owen smiled thinly. "Most people don't know value when they see it." His gaze flicked toward the willow, then to the open container at Michael's feet. "You seem to have found something interesting there." Ranger stepped between them, tail stiff, teeth showing in silent warning. Owen didn't flinch but gave the dog a sidelong glance that was almost disdainful. Fine animal, loyal, but loyalty can be dangerous in the wrong hands. Michael straightened. The property's not for sale. Something cold passed through Owen's gray eyes. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the mask of charm returned. A shame, he said. Opportunities like this don't come twice. He turned and walked back toward a waiting black SUV parked by the roadside. Even from a distance, Michael could see the glint of tinted windows. Someone else sat inside, watching. When the vehicle rolled away, Maggie let out a shaky breath. Well, she said, forcing a nervous laugh, that wasn't ominous at all. That night, back at the lodge, the wind returned. Michael reviewed the documents under lamplight, while Ranger paced by the window. The map showed every tunnel, every turn of the buried waterway. He realized what his aunt had protected wasn't gold or jewels. It was the legal right to water, the most valuable thing in a dying valley. Ranger suddenly growled, teeth bared. He lunged toward the back door, barking furiously. Michael followed, flashlight in hand, just in time to see a dark figure vaulting over the fence and vanishing into the woods. Ranger dashed forward and returned moments later, with something in his jaws. A small black device, no bigger than a matchbox. Michael took it and turned it over under the light. It wasn't a key, nor jewelry. It was a listening bug, its tiny red light blinking once before dying. Someone had been listening, and now they knew. The day broke gray and heavy with mist, the kind that seemed to muffle even the sound of thought. Michael Harris stood at the edge of the old willow, its long tendrils brushing the ground like an old woman's hair. The memory of last night still clawed at him, the blinking red light of the listening device, the quiet that followed. He hadn't slept much. Ranger sat beside him, alert as ever, his breath steaming faintly in the cold. The dog's fur gleamed bronze where the morning light touched it, his eyes a steady protective amber. Michael knelt beside him, brushing the fur behind his ear. "You saved us again, boy," he whispered. Ranger gave a low, approving rumble, as if he knew. By late morning, Maggie Brooks arrived in her old green pickup, its paint faded by years of mountain sun. She stepped out wearing a tan trench coat and wool gloves, her hair pinned loosely beneath a knit hat. There was a lightness in her smile that morning, though worry shadowed her eyes. "I couldn't stop thinking about that map," she said. "If your aunt was right about a chamber beneath the lodge, it might still be there. When the stone answers, that's what she wrote, right?" Michael nodded. "I think it means sound, like an echo chamber, something built to respond." She raised a brow. "An underground echo chamber? That's oddly poetic." "So was she," Michael said quietly. He unfolded the blueprint they had found, the ink pale but legible. A faint dotted line snaked beneath the property, ending at a mark labeled Valve Chamber, Maintenance Access. They packed flashlights, ropes, and tools. Ranger followed close behind, nose twitching, every step cautious. The old cellar door groaned as Michael pulled it open. The air that rose from below was thick, damp, tinged with the smell of moss and rusting metal. Maggie wrinkled her nose but followed without hesitation, lantern light trembling against the stone walls. The tunnel sloped downward, lined with rough-cut granite. Water dripped in slow intervals, each drop echoing like the tick of an ancient clock. Ranger's claws clicked lightly against the stone, his breath shallow, ears flicking at every sound. After several minutes, they reached a narrow corridor branching off from the main shaft. A plaque embedded in the wall bore faded letters: Dry Creek Auxiliary Flow Chamber, 1942. Beneath it, a small brass panel with circular indentations, 5 of them, worn smooth from age. Maggie shone her light on the markings. "Looks like something's missing." Michael studied the pattern, remembering his aunt's words. Water flows beneath stone. A heart beats under ash. He picked up a loose pebble and tapped one of the indentations gently. The sound that came back was dull. Then he tapped another, clearer, the third, deeper. He exhaled slowly. "The stone that speaks." He tapped a rhythm, slow then fast, mimicking the pulse of a heartbeat. Thud, 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 thud. The sound carried through the corridor, and then, somewhere behind the wall, a hollow groan answered. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. The stone panel shifted inward with a grinding sound, revealing a hidden passage. Maggie's mouth fell open. "You actually did it!" Ranger barked once, tail wagging, then stepped forward before either of them could stop him. The tunnel beyond was narrower, the air colder. Moss grew thick on the stones, slick underfoot. The smell of earth and age filled their lungs, like the breath of history itself. Halfway down, Ranger stopped suddenly. His ears flattened, and a low growl rippled from his throat. Michael froze. In the beam of the flashlight, a thin wire glinted across the floor. "Tripwire," he muttered. "Someone's been down here recently." Maggie's hand trembled slightly. Owen's people. Most likely. He crouched, careful not to touch the wire, and found the mechanism. New metal, not rusted. Someone had rigged the tunnel to collapse, or worse. He disarmed it slowly, sweat cold against his temple. When he finished, Ranger sniffed the ground, then looked back, eyes sharp, as if urging them onward. They reached the heart of the chamber, a large circular room carved entirely from granite. In its center stood a rusted valve wheel taller than Maggie, bolted into a concrete dais. Pipes ran along the walls, some burst and corroded, others humming faintly with the sound of pressure waiting to be freed. Michael placed his hand on the wheel. "This must be it." Maggie stepped closer, her voice low. "Do you think it still works?" "Only one way to find out." He turned it. At first, it resisted, screeching against decades of neglect. Then it gave way, spinning slowly. The chamber shuddered. From deep below came a rumbling sound, like thunder buried beneath the earth. Ranger barked, startled, but not afraid. A jet of water burst from a cracked pipe and sprayed into the air, clean, cold, shimmering in their light. Maggie gasped. "It's still alive!" Michael laughed softly, disbelief and wonder blending in his voice. "This land isn't dead. It's been waiting." For a moment, the three of them stood in silence, listening to the sound of the water, like the heartbeat of something reborn. Then the echo of footsteps shattered it. At the tunnel entrance, several men appeared, broad-shouldered, dressed in work jackets and boots caked with mud. At their center stood Owen Price, his expression cool and deliberate. The lamplight carved sharp lines into his face, making his gray eyes gleam like silver ice. "Impressive," Owen said, his voice echoing eerily. "You've managed to wake the sleeping beast. Now why don't you hand over what you found before someone gets hurt?" Maggie stepped closer to Michael instinctively. Ranger growled, muscles tense. Michael straightened, his face calm. "You can't threaten me on my own land, Owen." "Your land?" Owen scoffed. "A pile of rocks and a puddle doesn't make you a king. Be reasonable. Sign the deed." He tossed a folded document toward Michael. It landed at his feet, a sales contract, already filled out. Price Construction listed as the buyer. "Sign it," Owen said, voice tightening, "or the lake goes dry again. Permanently." Michael didn't move. Instead, he reached into his jacket and tapped the small camera clipped to his chest, a body cam blinking red. "Already recording, and I've got the water rights document notarized in 1943. You so much as touch that valve, this footage goes public." For the first time, Owen's composure cracked. His jaw clenched, eyes flickering to his men. Then he smiled, a thin, venomous smile. "You think you've won, Harris, but this valley doesn't forgive." He motioned to his men, and they retreated, their boots fading into the tunnels. The echo lingered long after they were gone. When the silence returned, Maggie exhaled shakily. "I can't believe he'd actually—" "He would," Michael said quietly. "People like him always do." They climbed back toward the surface, emerging into the cold twilight. The first flakes of snow had begun to fall, catching in Maggie's hair. Michael brushed one from her shoulder, a small, instinctive gesture. Their eyes met, just long enough to feel something fragile but undeniable forming between them. That night, by the fireplace of the lodge, the room glowed with soft amber light. Michael sat across from Maggie, the journal open between them. He spoke of his marriage, the years of success that hollowed him out, the quiet that came after his wife's departure, the loneliness he wore like a second skin. "I thought peace came from money," he said, "but the more I had, the less I slept." Maggie smiled gently. "Peace knows where to live. It doesn't knock on every door. Maybe it found the right one now." Outside, Ranger lay by the door, head on his paws, watching the firelight dance on the walls. Somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of water echoed beneath the earth, steady, alive, and waiting. The wind came first, sharp, angry gusts rolling down from the mountains, rattling the dry leaves that clung stubbornly to the trees. By dusk, the horizon had turned a bruised violet, and the scent of smoke was already on the air. Michael Harris stood on the porch of Moore Lodge, uneasy. The world felt too quiet. the kind of silence that listens back. Ranger paced the floorboards, tail low, muscles taut, ears pricked to the dark. Inside, Maggie Brooks was sorting papers from Eleanor's journal, her hair loose around her face, the lamplight catching in the silver strands. She looked up when she heard the wind slam a shutter against the wall. "Storm coming?" "Something's coming," Michael said. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Since their confrontation in the tunnel, he hadn't seen Owen Price. But absence didn't mean surrender. As if on cue, the first flicker appeared in the distance, a small orange light at the edge of the field. Within moments, it spread. Flames clawed their way up the side of the old pump shed, the one housing the control system for the water valves. "God," Maggie whispered. "That's arson." Michael grabbed his coat, his voice steady but cold. "He's making it look like insurance fraud. If the pump burns, the line collapses, and the whole property floods. We lose everything, including the evidence." They ran. The fire roared louder as they neared it, wind feeding the blaze until it became a living, writhing thing. The shed's corrugated roof buckled under the heat. Sparks flew like furious stars, and smoke wrapped the valley in a suffocating shroud. Ranger darted ahead, his black and gold coat flashing in the firelight. He barked once, sharp and commanding, then disappeared into the haze. "Ranger!" Michael shouted. Maggie coughed through the smoke, her eyes streaming. "He's heading for the back. He knows something." They followed. Behind the shed, near the foundation, Ranger was pawing frantically at a rusted metal hatch, the emergency flood release Eleanor had written about decades ago. The dog turned to them and barked, short and urgent, like a command. Maggie dropped to her knees beside him. "He's right. If we open it, the diverted line will drown the fire, but it'll flood the tunnel." Michael's voice was hoarse. "Better water than ashes." They heaved on the lever together. It barely moved. The mechanism was locked from the inside, from the underground valve chamber. Michael turned to Maggie, eyes fierce through the smoke. "Get clear of the field. Take Ranger with you." "No," she said firmly, gripping his arm. "You'll need help." But he was already running toward the old cellar door, vanishing into the dark. Ranger growled low, torn between following and obeying her. Maggie knelt and pressed her foreheads to the dog's. "Go after him, boy. Find him." Ranger bolted. The tunnel groaned under the force of the wind. Above, dust falling like rain. Michael's flashlight beam wavered against the damp walls as he stumbled toward the valve chamber. He could hear the fire above, the muffled roar, the angry hiss of timbers splitting in the heat. When he reached the chamber, the air was already warm, heavy with smoke seeping through the stone vents. The large wheel in the center gleamed faintly with condensation. He gripped it, tried to turn, stuck. He cursed under his breath, coughing hard. Then he heard it, claws scraping stone. Ranger burst through the side passage, barking wildly, his collar light flashing red. He circled Michael once, then ran to a small panel at the far wall, pawing furiously. Michael stumbled closer. Behind a layer of grime, faintly carved into the stone, were 4 small dots. He froze. A heart beats under ash. The code. 2 short, 1 long, 2 short, 3 long. He pressed the sequence with the heel of his hand. Tap, 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 tap. The stone vibrated faintly, then shifted. A section of the wall slid open with a deep, ancient groan. Inside was a small, sealed room lined with iron shelves. And on one of them, a tin box stamped with the insignia of Dry Creek National Bank. He pulled it free. Inside lay documents wrapped in oilcloth, notarized transfers, ledgers, and a letter written in Eleanor's unmistakable hand. For whoever defends this land, these funds are entrusted to the Eleanor Moore Conservation Trust, backed by the water rights of Dry Creek. Should corruption threaten, truth will surface with it. Michael stared, realization dawning. Eleanor hadn't just preserved the water, she'd preserved the proof, the money trail connecting the land, the rights, and the hidden trust. But the walls trembled violently. The fire above was collapsing the ground supports. Smoke poured down through the ventilation shafts, thick and choking. "Ranger!" he shouted. "The valve!" The dog ran back to the wheel, braced his front paws against it, barking furiously. Michael joined him, both pushing with desperate strength. The metal screeched, then turned. With a roar, Cold water burst from the lower vents, racing through the tunnels, surging toward the fire. The sound was deafening, 1,000 voices rising from the earth. Maggie, still outside near the tree line, saw the flood erupt from beneath the burning shed. Steam exploded into the air as the flames hissed and died. The ground shook beneath her boots. Then, faintly through the noise, she heard a sound that cut through everything else. Ranger's bark, distant but alive. Moments later, the cellar door burst open, water pouring down the steps. Michael emerged, soaked and gasping, clutching the tin box to his chest. Ranger followed, fur-drenched, shaking water everywhere. Maggie ran to them, tears cutting streaks through soot on her face. "You're insane," she choked, half laughing, half crying. "Maybe," Michael wheezed, "but it worked." The wail of sirens echoed down the valley. The volunteer fire department and 2 police cruisers racing toward the property. Among them was Sheriff Daniels, a broad man in his late 50s with sun-browned skin, pale blue eyes, and the calm authority of someone who had seen too much to ever be surprised again. He strode toward them, hat pulled low against the wind. "Mr. Harris," he said, voice gravelly, "got your distress signal from that collar device. Guessing this is the arson you warned me about." Michael nodded, still catching his breath. "Owen Price, he's behind it. I've got proof. Body cam footage and financial records linking him to a cover-up." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Then we'd best pay Mr. Price a visit." An hour later, as dawn broke red over the smoking ruins, Owen was led away in handcuffs, his once perfect coat smeared with soot. He said nothing as Daniels read him his rights, only stared at Michael with quiet hatred. "You'll regret this," he muttered. Michael met his gaze evenly. "Maybe, but not tonight." By the time the last embers died, rain began to fall, soft, steady, cleansing. Maggie stood beside Michael, the world glowing faintly under the gray morning. Ranger leaned against his leg, tail flicking lazily, the fur along his neck still damp but warm. Michael looked down at Maggie, her hand trembling slightly in his. "We lost the shed," he said quietly. She smiled. "We kept the truth." He squeezed her hand. "And maybe something else worth keeping." For the first time in years, Michael Harris didn't feel the ache of emptiness. The rain washed it away, leaving only the sound of water, the same sound that had once been lost beneath the stone. Spring came to Dry Creek Valley like a sigh of forgiveness. The ash from the Great Fire had long settled into the soil, and the charred fields now shimmered with the green promise of rebirth. The sky, once gray with smoke, stretched wide and blue, and from beneath the ground came the sound that had become the valley's new heartbeat: water, running free again after decades of silence. Michael Harris stood at the courthouse steps, the document trembling slightly in his hands, though not from fear. The judge's ruling had been clear. The water rights, first granted to Eleanor Moore in 1943, were now lawfully his. And with them came the official activation of the Eleanor Moore Conservation Trust, a fund Eleanor had built in secret to protect the valley and those who called it home. The courtroom had been filled with townspeople that morning, old farmers in faded hats, women from the church choir, and even a few wide-eyed children who had grown up hearing about the dry valley. Now, they watched as the man who saved their water signed the papers that would change its fate. At the back of the room, Judge Mildred Hanlon presided over the case, a woman in her early 60s with iron-gray hair pulled tight in a bun, her face severe but fair, her eyes bright and intelligent. Once a civil rights attorney, she had a reputation for having no patience for deceit and an unexpected fondness for dogs. When she had read the final line of Eleanor's original deed aloud, "Water once stolen returns to its keeper," even her voice had softened. After the verdict, the sheriff's men escorted Owen Price out in silence, his empire crumbling as fast as the illusions he had built. Owen's slick charm was gone now, replaced by a hollow defiance. When he passed Michael in the hallway, his face looked older, the gray in his hair suddenly more pronounced, the corners of his mouth drawn down as if the years had finally caught up. "Enjoy your victory, Harris," he said quietly. "It won't last forever." Michael met his gaze steadily. Neither does greed. By summer, the restoration began. The old Moore Lodge, once a half-abandoned property tucked beneath the willow trees, was reborn as Willow and Stone Lodge, its name a tribute to the two symbols that had carried them through fire and water. The main hall was rebuilt with reclaimed timber, its windows opening toward the newly restored lake, where sunlight glittered like coins across the ripples. Maggie Brooks worked beside him each day, her laughter mingling with the hammering and sawdust. She had opened a small reading room at the lodge, a quiet space for the elderly of Dry Creek to gather, read, and share stories over tea. Shelves lined the walls, filled with donated books, each one stamped with a small emblem, a willow leaf and a drop of water. "Books and tea," Michael had teased one morning as she arranged the final row. "That's your idea of revolution?" "Better than your version," she said, smiling, "which involves nearly drowning yourself to prove a point." Ranger, now a local hero, had found a new calling. He worked twice a week with Tom Weaver, the 70-year-old veteran who had once taught him obedience training. Tom, tall and slightly stooped, with a kind face and steady hands, ran therapy sessions for veterans battling post-traumatic stress. Ranger seemed to understand them instinctively, the trembling hands, the silent stares. He would press his warm muzzle against a man's shaking knee, or lie across someone's feet until their breathing steadied. "He listens better than most therapists," Tom liked to joke. The Eleanor Moore Trust began to fund scholarships for young locals interested in carpentry, hydrology, and conservation work, crafts that tied human hands back to the pulse of the land. "Build what lasts," Eleanor had written in her final letter, "and teach others how to keep it alive." One evening, as twilight spread across the lake, Michael stood beneath the great willow tree, holding a sealed envelope he had received from the county archives. Inside was the last letter from Eleanor Moore, recovered from the tin box found in the hidden chamber. He unfolded the paper slowly, his hands trembling just a little. "My dear successor, water is the memory of the earth, and love is the memory of those who walk upon it. One day, you'll stand where I stood, between loss and renewal, and you'll understand that both are forms of faith. Let the current carry you. Let it speak your name." He looked up, and there was Maggie standing near the path, her hair catching the sunset, her expression soft and knowing. "What did she write?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "That love and water aren't so different. They both find their way home." Later that night, as they walked the rebuilt grounds, Maggie laughed softly and pointed at the carved initials above the lodge door, EM plus LS. "I always thought that was some tragic love story," she said. "So did I," Michael replied. "Turns out it wasn't a romance at all. EM stood for Eleanor Moore, LS for Lake Stewardship, the conservation project she hid under a lover's code." Maggie laughed. "That's the sweetest deception I've ever heard." "Still," he said, looking at her with a smile that reached his eyes, "I think the lodge could use its own initials now." She tilted her head. "Meaning?" Michael whistled softly. From the porch came Ranger, trotting proudly with something in his mouth, a small velvet box tied to his collar with a thin ribbon. The dog sat before her, tail wagging furiously, eyes gleaming with mischief. Maggie blinked, laughter and tears mixing at once. "You trained him for this?" "I had help," Michael said. "Sheriff Daniels said he'd arrest me if I didn't ask you soon." Ranger barked, as if agreeing with the law. Michael knelt, opening the box. Inside was a simple silver ring, shaped like two streams joining into one. "Maggie Brooks," he said softly, "will you build the rest of our days with me?" Maggie pressed a hand over her mouth, then laughed through her tears. "Only if that scruffy boy," she nodded toward Ranger, "agrees to be the best man." Ranger barked twice, decisively, and that was how, under the arching branches of the willow tree, with the sound of water whispering at their feet, Michael Harris and Maggie Brooks found something rarer than gold or land: peace. The lodge opened to the public a month later, its first guests a group of veterans and teachers. They came to rest, to heal, to learn. The walls smelled faintly of cedar and tea. In the evenings, the valley filled with laughter again, the same laughter that had been missing for a generation. Michael often sat by the lake with Ranger's head resting on his boots, watching Maggie through the window as she read aloud to a circle of elders. He realized that wealth had nothing to do with ownership, and everything to do with restoration, of the land, of the soul, of the quiet spaces between two people who had learned how to listen. As night fell, the wind carried the sound of rippling water through the valley, like a lullaby written in the language of earth. Ranger sighed and closed his eyes, dreaming, as the moonlight turned the lake silver and the willow's branches danced in the breeze. Sometimes miracles don't arrive in thunder or lightning. They whisper through the simplest things: a loyal dog's bark, the return of flowing water, or two hearts finding peace after the storm. Michael thought he was restoring a broken lodge, but in truth, it was God restoring him, piece by piece, through love, purpose, and grace. Because that's how the Lord works. He hides his miracles in everyday moments, in kindness shared, in forgiveness offered, and in courage quietly lived. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that faith still moves mountains, that love still builds bridges, and that no life is ever too late to begin again. Comment your thoughts below, subscribe for more stories of hope, and may God bless you and your loved ones, today and always.